The Fed governor caught admitting inflation is simply too high 2 days after the White House declared victory. Section 1. The Victory Lap. Let's start on July 17th, a Friday. Inside the White House press briefing room, Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt steps up to the podium, and she is not being subtle. She holds up the week's inflation report like a trophy. Tuesday's CPI report confirmed what President Trump predicted. She tells the room prices are falling and this administration's economic policies are working. She goes further. Inflation, she says, dropped 0.4% last month, beating expectations and marking the largest monthly decline in more than 6 years. Gasoline, electricity, car insurance, hotels. She lists them off one by one, sector after sector, all supposedly getting cheaper because of this administration's policies. This wasn't a one-time comment either. Go back further, and you'll find the president himself in December declaring inflation totally neutralized. In January, standing in Detroit, calling it flat out defeated in his State of the Union in February, telling a joint session of Congress that his administration had driven core inflation down to, quote, the lowest level in more than 5 years. So by mid-July, the story coming out of Washington was simple. Inflation is beaten. The fight is over. Go ahead and celebrate. There was just one problem. 2 days before that press briefing, someone who actually sits on the Federal Reserve stood up in front of a room full of economists and said the exact opposite. Section 2. The admission nobody at the podium wanted. July 15th, an Exchequer Club luncheon in Washington. The kind of quiet, wonky event where Fed officials usually choose every word like it's a legal document. Because it is Governor Lisa Cook takes the microphone, and she doesn't do what you would expect from someone inside the same government that just spent weeks telling the country the war on prices was won. She says it plainly. Inflation, in her words, is simply too high. Not close to target, not nearly there, too high. She goes further, telling the room that the current rate is nearly highest it's been since 2023. And then she does something even more direct. She names 2 specific threats that could make it worse, not better from here. The ongoing war involving Iran, which is putting pressure on energy prices, and the explosive build-out of AI data centers across the country, which is straining electricity demands and pushing costs up in the process. Then comes a line that shouldn't have been the headline everywhere. If we do not see signs of disinflation soon, I am prepared to act, Cook stated. I am fully committed to reaching our inflation target, and this commitment is unwavering. Read what that actually means. A sitting Federal Reserve governor just told the country on the record that if prices don't start cooling off, more rates hike could be coming. That is not the language of somebody who thinks the fight against inflation is over. This is the language of somebody bracing for it to get worse. 2 days. That's the entire gap between a federal governor warning inflation is simply too high and a White House podium declaring victory over the same number. Section 3. The governor Trump tried to remove. And here's the detail that makes this so much sharper than a normal disagreement between 2 government officials. Lisa Cook isn't just any Fed governor. She's the one the Trump administration tried to fire outright. Earlier this year, the administration argued Cook should be removed from the Federal Reserve Board entirely. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 ruling, the court sided with Cook, protecting her seat and reaffirming that the Federal Reserve is supposed to operate independently of whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office. So think about the position that puts her in. This is a woman the administration already tried to remove from her job. And months after surviving that fight, she is standing in front of a room of economists, using her actual authority to directly contradict the same administration's public messaging on the exact subject the fight was supposedly about, the direction of the economy. She didn't do it in an interview trying to score points. She did it in a formal economic outlook speech, the kind of remark that get published word for word by the Federal Reserve itself, where every sentence is on the record forever. Section 4. What the numbers actually say. Now you might be thinking, maybe Cook is the outlier here. Maybe the White House has the better read on the actual data. So let's look at what the data itself says, separate from either side's talking points. Economists at Capital Economics called the administration's virtually no inflation framing, quote, factually incorrect. Core CPI, the measure that strips out food and energy and is a number the Fed actually watches closest, was still running at 2.6% as of the most recent reading, well above the Fed's 2% target. The Yale Budget Lab estimated that because of this year's tariffs specifically, the average consumer will end up paying an additional $1,300 to $1,700 in 2026 compared to what they would have paid before this administration's trade policy took effect. And even the White House's own selectively quoted comparisons don't hold up cleanly. Electricity prices, for example, the same category Leavitt cited as falling, have actually climbed steadily since the pandemic and were sitting at their highest point on record as of this January, according to federal data. So you have a Federal Reserve governor, independent by law, warning that inflation remains dangerously elevated and could be worsened. You have a White House press podium calling the same fight already won. And you have economists and the Fed's own preferred inflation gauge lining up much closer to the governor's version of the events than the podiums. Section 5. Why this actually matters to you. Here's why this isn't just Washington noise. When the Federal Reserve believes inflation is under control, it moves towards cutting interest rates, which makes mortgages, car loans, and credit cards cheaper. When the Fed believes inflation is still dangerously high, like Cook just said publicly, it holds rates steady or raises them, which keeps your borrowing costs exactly where they are, or pushes them higher. That means the fight happening right now in public between a Fed governor and a White House podium isn't just about who's telling the truth. It's about which version of reality actually decides what your next credit card statement, your next car payment, or your next mortgage rate looks like. And right now, the person with actual legal authority over that decision, the one the administration already tried and failed to remove from her seat, just told the country that the fight isn't over. It might be getting worse. So I want to know what you think. Do you trust the number coming from the podium or the one coming from the person the Supreme Court just protected specifically so she could keep saying things like this? Drop it in the comments. And if this connected some dots for you, hit that subscribe button because we are going to keep tracking exactly which version of this economy turns out to be true.